Welcome everyone to Choice Conversations, the podcast dedicated to helping you improve your life, one choice at a time. I'm your host, Chris Stefanik. Let's do this. All right, today I've got an interview with Joshua Rivers. Joshua, he is the host of the Creative Studios Academy podcast, and he's going to talk with us today about content creation, about being a media producer, blogs, podcasts, vlogs. What are some of the tricks of the trade, how to be successful, how to grow your audience, how to turn being a content creator into a business, that sort of thing. Check it out. Before I play that interview for you, though, I did want to invite you to join me over on Facebook at the Choice Conversations group. So there's a link to that in the show notes. You could also just go to Facebook and do a search for Choice Conversations group, and it'll come right up. And there we can get together, and I'm definitely going to be more active in that group than what I've been in the past, and I'm looking forward to seeing you there. And as I share with you things I've learned along the way as I'm on this path of personal development. So I look forward to seeing you there. All right, here's the interview with Joshua. Hey, Josh, welcome to the show.
Hey, glad to be here, Chris.
All right. So for my listeners who might not be aware of your work, why don't you take a few minutes to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I have a lot of things going on. I'm trying to minimize, actually, but I currently work a full-time job at a factory, but I've been slowly growing a side business where I am editing podcasts and working with clients with other aspects of their podcast production as well. And so I've been growing this for the last couple years, and been really working on trying to get that to where I can be able to replace my full-time income, so I can be able to have more freedom in my time and in my income as well. And so working toward that, and I've been able to put a lot of focus into the business, and then I've had to make some changes here and there to be able to try to scale better and be able to focus better on what it is that I'm trying to offer. And so doing pretty good. So that's kind of an overview. Right.
Now, I became familiar with your work through your podcast, Creative Studios. Why don't you talk a little bit about that? And was that like the genesis of this business, or did the idea for the business start first and then the podcast grew out of that?
Yeah, that was actually kind of one of the iterations of my business. And so prior to starting that podcast, I started that podcast, I think it was 2014. Or maybe it was 2015, back then. And at that time, I was doing web design, and I had several clients that I would come across. And one of the things that I was trying to help them with was not just create a basic static website, but try to teach them how to be able to have ongoing content so that it would be easier for them to be able to climb up the ranks in Google and be able to do things like that, and be able to have a little more constant contact with their own clients or potential clients. And so I had already been blogging some, and so I was trying to give them instructions on it. And so then after doing this several times in a row, I started thinking, well, maybe I can create something that can be able to teach people how to do this in a way to where I'm not taking all of my time every single time to be able to do this, and I can just direct them to this resource. And so that's how the Creative Studio got started. And it was really, really broad when I first started, just kind of looking at online content creation in general. So it was about blogging, about podcasting, had some things in there about video and social media. And so just a wide variety of things, because honestly at the time I didn't know exactly what I wanted to narrow in on. And so I kept it broad. And so I did it in a seasonal format. The first season was just kind of random stuff. Season 2 focused more on blogging and working on creating a website. And then season 3, I zeroed in on how to podcast. And that was kind of where it kind of took a turn, because about the same time I started season 3 and teaching people how to podcast was about the time that I got my first client doing audio editing. And so that's when it kind of clicked for me that I could do better with the audio editing with podcasts than I could with doing websites, at least for me at that particular time. And so then my focus on the podcast changed to where I was zeroing in on podcasting. And so then season 4 went a little bit more niche into podcasting, to where I covered things about narrative podcasting, which is storytelling, documentary style, journalistic kind of thing there. And so I created I guess you could say a montage, something to where I interviewed 11 people altogether, but it wasn't just one episode was an interview. One episode was parts of 6 or 7 different interviews that was all essentially topical in how to be able to do that. And so I went through and did a 10-part series with that. And so that podcast is kind of an extension now of my side business. And so to kind of be able to showcase some of the different things that podcasters can be able to do and what they can be able to expect if they work with me.
Mm-hmm. So when you were going through that transition period, I mean, how did you feel when you were experiencing that?
And so which transition exactly? The going from the website to the podcasting?
Right.
And so, well, at the time I was struggling, actually being able to find some clients that were willing to pay decently to be able to get their website done. And so there's a lot of things coming out at the time that made it a lot easier for people to do the websites themselves. And so a lot of people I was talking to were just looking for resources on how to be able to do it themselves, not looking for help at the particular time. Now I probably was looking at the wrong places. But anyway, so that's kind of what I was coming across. And so the people that I did find that wanted to get some help were looking like, well, I could get this website up for like $200. And I'm like, no, it's actually going to be a little bit more than that for me to be able to work with you. Even though I wasn't real expensive, I wasn't that cheap as either. And so they just were having a hard time being able to grasp why I would charge a certain amount if it's quote unquote so easy to be able to do it. And so, it's always come across those different, hurdles and obstacles. And so, but then it was just an accident that the podcast editing happened to show up. And so I had been podcasting myself, and I was interviewed on another person's podcast, but they told me that they had a bunch of interviews in the can, and so it was going to be a few months before it aired. And I said, okay, that's fine. Just keep me posted on when that's going to happen. And a couple of months went by. I'd actually forgotten about it for a little bit, and then I remembered, and so I reached out to him and said, hey, I haven't heard this come out yet. Just wondering kind of like what the status is. Just keep me posted. And so he says, hey, man, I haven't been able to post on my podcast for a while because I just got so busy, blah, blah, blah. And so I wasn't thinking of anything of it when I offered, but I said, hey, I have my own podcast. I can probably give you a hand a little bit if you want to help you able to get stuff out the door. And so he said, great. And so he hired me very, very cheap, but he hired me. And so that was my first client. And so I'm like, okay, well, that's kind of cool. And I was talking about it with another friend of mine, and he said, oh, really? He says, I was thinking about getting an editor. And so he hired me. And so that's when it kind of clicked. It's like, well, this is a whole lot easier trying to find work this way than it was to get website work. And so that's when it kind of clicked in my head. And so I'm like, okay, let me put some stuff together that I can be able to actually present to people as this is what I do. This is what I offer. And so, so that's when I created Podcast Guy, and then eventually just morphed into an official business, a little over a year ago, beginning of 2016, where I officially formed podcastguymedia.com, or Podcast Guy Media LLC with the website podcastmedia.com. And so that kind of transition there happened. And it just kind of seemed to fit really well. And so I was able to shift my focus, into those kind of things. And so I still do a little bit of website work, but most of my focus has been on podcast work now.
Interesting. Yeah, that's pretty fascinating. One of the things that about editing podcasts for people is it seems fairly universal that podcasters hate editing. And in fact, we were talking, I didn't even realize that you had podcast media going on. I became, like I said, I followed you through your creative media podcast. And, you know, I didn't even know that you were doing this as a side gig. And I was just telling you off the air, I'm like, about how much I hate editing. So there's definitely some demand for that, right?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
I'm interested how you're able to make a good amount of money off of it, though, knowing that like there's a lot of competition. So I know because I don't like editing, I've looked around a little bit about outsourcing this, you know, and you could just like go on Fiverr and maybe it's not high quality what I'm getting off, but then I haven't actually tried it to see what, but you know, there was tons of people on Fiverr offering like podcast editing. I know you can go to like Odesk or various places like that where you can get virtual assistants to do podcast editing for you. Given the global nature of that, the marketplace right now, you know, where, you know, people in the Philippines or India or wherever, you know, you could be competing with them. How have you managed to turn that into like a profitable endeavor?
Well, it is kind of difficult because, again, you still got people that have the mindset of paying as little as you can, especially when they see people offering stuff for cheap. And so it makes it difficult in that aspect. But I mean, like with a lot of things, generally speaking, you get what you pay for.
Right.
And so when it comes to someone that does editing, it's not just the technical parts of it. But one of the things that I have to be able to offer, that I'm starting to showcase more now that I've, really looked at what I need to do to try to scale the business, is I'm not offering just my technical abilities, of being able to do the podcasting, but I've been doing a lot of podcasting and in the podcast world for a number of years now. I started listening to podcasts in 2012, started my own podcast in 2013. And in the process, I lost count of the numbers, but I have produced over 200 of my own podcasts, and then I don't know, several hundred podcasts for different clients, as well as with my full-time job, I'm able to listen to a lot of podcasts. And so there was a while there that I was listening to probably 10 to 12 hours of podcasts a day, by listening to double speed. But I was listening to a lot of podcasts. And so I was going through 40 to 50 episodes a week listening to different podcasts. And so I'm able to bring perspective from a lot of other podcasts that are out there, what is being done and what can be done. And so being able to kind of look at it, so as I'm editing somebody's podcast, I can be able to kind of have in the back of my mind, okay, well, they're doing this. Well, I heard somebody else do it like this, so maybe I can make that suggestion and they can be able to make an improvement on their podcast. And so I've been able to make some little suggestions like that from time to time with my clients, and they've been able to make some pivots, and they've been able to see some positive change in their podcast as a result. And so there's things like that help me to be able to stand out. And I've gotten a lot of advice about, again, not trying to be the cheapest, because that's a losing battle. Because I mean, if you're doing the editing right, it takes time. and it takes the ability. And also there's one thing about being able to try to make some easy cuts, and be able to put things together. But if you're like going in there, basically like a surgeon and try to make everything seem seamless and to where you don't even notice that there was like 7 minutes of audio cut out of a 30-minute interview or whatever, and it just sounds flawless. That takes a lot of work and a lot of skill to be able to do that. And it takes time because you're like zooming in super close to be able to get to the finer details of the waveform.
Right.
And so yeah, so there's a lot that goes into it. And so the clients that realize the value of it are willing to pay, because they know that they're getting a good product and they're not having to worry about all the details. They just kind of hand it over and all of a sudden it comes out like gold. And so, or at least shiny, shinier than what they gave it to me. And so,
right. Yeah. And I also am a musician and edit my own music from time to time.
Okay.
And it's one of the things where I've noticed, like, if you want it to come out good, you really need to zoom in on the wave and that way you can keep it from there being the harsh cuts and the like. So, and I don't normally go to quite that precision on my podcasts. I leave my podcast a little more raw than what ideally I would have them be. But there's only so much time in the day, and I'm not, outsourcing it currently. So I probably will someday soon be outsourcing that. So I'll definitely have to keep that in mind. But yeah, that's really, really neat. So going back to creative studios and what I'm imagining is the process of going through creating these podcasts, which are like a tutorial on media creation. That not only you're providing value to your customers and making your own life a little easier because you don't have to like keep teaching the same lesson over and over. You can just be like, instead, here's a link to this podcast where I talk about this. Not only that, but I imagine just the process of going through and creating a podcast about these various topics helps you to get your thoughts in order. It helps you to become more polished and more of an expert in these areas yourself, right? I mean, has that been your experience?
Yeah, actually, definitely. And so one of the things I've had in my mind is to go back and kind of polish up some of the things that I've done. And I was going to replace the episodes, but be able to create additional resources that are maybe a little more cleaner in the presentation of it. And so like specifically like at the How to Podcast. And so I think I organized it really well. And what I did is I wanted to bring other people on so I could be able to bring their perspective in addition to my own perspective when it came to like specific aspects of doing podcasting. And so I'd bring someone on that maybe kind of specialized in media hosts. And so the media host I use is Lipson. And so I brought on Rob Welch. And so he talked about media hosts and the importance of it and things like that to be able to get it from his perspective because that's what he does. And so that brings an additional perspective. And I bring different people on that had like a particular experience in those particular things to be able, that way it's not just me saying it and it's like, okay, here's one of the industry leaders that can vouch that like this is the best practice for being able to do this. And be able to do that. And so I was able to get a lot of good information. But then there was also additional things that came up in the episodes, and there was some stuff that was talked about. And so there was like one main topic per episode, but then there would be like other topics that were kind of scattered throughout. And so as I went through, I realized, okay, well, I already talked about media hosts and Rob Walsh brought a lot of great things, but also this guy said some things and this guy said some things that kind of play into it. And then after the fact, I'm thinking, okay, well, there was also this aspect I could have brought out. And so like you said, yeah, it kind of helps clarify. And so I wanted to create something that could be able to kind of clean up that previous conversation and be able to revamp it so it's an even better resource for people when they come to it.
Right, right. And as you've been working with clients and as they create content and creating your own content, like what has been some of the best strategies that you found for growing your audience?
Yeah, that's a tricky one because one thing, there's a lot of people that have in their head that basically all they have to do is create it and then share it every once in a while on social media. And some people don't even go that far. And so one of the things that really works is getting other people involved. And so I work with one guy, and so he's actually hired me for more than just the editing. He calls me his podcast manager, and so I help handle a lot of the aspects regarding the podcast. And so I work with him closely on a lot of this stuff. And so we've been able to see, I think it was, I can't remember, sometime last year to like the beginning of last year to the beginning of this year, we went from something like 700 downloads per episode to where we're almost at 2,000 per episode. And so we've been able to have that growth. And now, of course, we're hoping to be able to continue that trajectory, to be able to grow the podcast even more, to be able to double or triple or whatever the podcast over the next year as well. And so be able to do that. And so a lot of the things that we've done to be able to do that is we've looked for other distribution places that we can be able to share it. And so trying to think now, iHeartRadio, I think is one that we added. And so, because we were just kind of in the basic places, but we added the Google Play Music one when that became available. And so, like I said, iHeartRadio. And so there's some different distribution places. So, and those aren't necessarily going to get you a whole bunch of listens just by themselves, but it's another opportunity for people to be able to find you. And so we did that. But another thing he does is, this is also for, in coordination with his business. And so he coordinates it with other aspects of his business. And so as he gets clients coming in, sometimes, he'll be referring to the podcast as a resource for them, saying, hey, you're go listen to this person's story on what they did with this. And here's a thing that kind of goes step by step on how you can be able to do this. And so, kind of directing people that way. And so we're actually looking at trying to be able to improve on that aspect to really incorporate more things like that. But then he also has a lot of joint venture type of things that go on. And so that helps to be able to promote the podcast. And he's out there also writing articles, and he's is a guest on other people's podcasts, and that helps to be able to spread the word. And so he did a lot of that for a while. And so last year it started to kick in. It took a while. And that's one thing people don't realize is that, they think that they can do something and that they're going to see results in the next couple of days or couple of weeks or something like that. But it takes months, sometimes takes years for some of that to be able to really sink in and for people to really catch on. Oh, this is so-and-so, and they can be able to help with this. And they just really love the stuff that you're able to come with. And so he did a lot of that. And so a lot of that has come back and it's really benefited the podcast as a result of a lot of the work that he did. And then some of the things that I was able to throw out, as well as far as some of the things that are going on in the podcast arena.
Right, right. So now what is your opinion on doing like solo podcasts versus having guests? I know that you do both of that on your own. And of course, you work with a lot of clients. So, like, what are the pros and cons of that? And especially from like a growing your audience perspective.
Well, I don't think there's it all depends on the content that you're trying to bring, and then also the I guess you could say the atmosphere or the tone, as far as like how the way you want to present the content. And so you could do a solo thing, and that'll be more of instructional kind of format. And so kind of like a teacher standing up in front of a classroom or something like that, or maybe even one-on-one teaching you something, as an instructor. So generally that's more of what the solo shows would be. You get a co-host, and then you got a little bit more back and forth banter, that's able to go back and forth. And so, usually you're able to introduce a little bit more comedy. That way, some people like to have a little humor as they go through, kind of show a little bit more personality. And so that kind of helps kind of bring a little bit, diversification. Plus then that also helps bring an extra voice in, to be able to sometimes bring in extra perspective, to be able to do that. And usually you want to try to find someone that is similar enough to you, but doesn't necessarily agree with everything, so that you can be able to hash out when there's conflicts that come up. And so there's whatever topic, and it's like, here, I think this is the best way. Well, that's an okay way, but I prefer this way instead. And they go back and forth, and they kind of, have a debate, if you will. And so when you got a co-host, you kind of have that kind of thing. And of course there needs to be, a good, they need to kind of gel. And so you get, when you listen to two different people talk, you can tell if there's chemistry there, and if there's not chemistry. And so if it's cold and stale and things like that, it doesn't come across as well as if you can tell, like, hey, these guys, they just kind of click, and the stuff that they bring is just great. And then, kind of similar to that would be as if you're just interviewing somebody. You're bringing somebody else on as a conversation, but it's kind of more of a one-off kind of conversation as opposed to a co-host that is, ongoing. And so, and that helps you to be able to, kind of like dive in, and like I did, I was trying to bring outside perspective and be able to get industry experts to be able to bring their inspiration. One of my clients, they focus on their podcast, not necessarily the expert advice, but they look for the individual stories from their clients. And so the podcast is called Happen to Your Career, and and he focuses on the change that people have gone through in their careers, that transition from one career to another career, and kind of the steps and the process they went through, the feelings that they had, and all the struggles and things like that. And so bringing out the stories of those. And so he brings people on to be able to tell those stories. And that's better than just him kind of saying, let me tell you about this person that did this. And they're able to come on themselves, and that way you hear the emotion, you hear the struggle in their voice and things like that. That really brings it really adds to it. And so when it comes to which format is better, it's hard to be able to say that, because it all depends on, again, whatever your goal is, what your content is, and then be able to do that. And so, and even within like the same niche, you can have two different styles, and it can serve two different audiences. And it can be very effective doing both ways. And so you can have, there's a lot of, how-to podcasts. And so podcasts about podcasting. So there's a bunch of them out there, now. And so there used to be just a handful, but now there's whatever, a dozen or 2 dozen of them. And of course I kind of threw my hat in that ring, with the creative studio, but there's some of them that they're strictly a solo show. There's some of them to where they're mostly a solo show, but they bring on guests every once in a while to be able to talk to them. There's one that is on purpose. They have multiple co-hosts, and that they just have a round table effect there that they do. They just talk about. Usually try to focus in on one, but they end up trailing off in other things there. But they're able to bring a lot of different perspective, and all of those podcasts are good, and they all bring really good content. And it's hard to say that one is better than the other because of a format, because they all have different formats, but they are bringing really good content still, and it's just kind of a different perspective, and it gives you a different feel as you're listening to it as you go through that. And so I know that's kind of maybe a cop-out answer of it depends, but it does. And so that's one of the things I try to help with when I talk to people with their podcast. It's like, okay, well, what's the goal of your podcast, and what are you thinking as far as this, and how is this going to work if you do this format, and so that's kind of the general answer, I guess you could say.
Right. Yeah. This is something that I've spent a lot of time thinking about, and Choice Conversations has had a little of all three of those styles on it. Mm-hmm. It actually started before it became Choice Conversations. It was a podcast that was originally hosted by a guy named Steve Patterson. It was Two Beers with Steve, and I was the co-host with him, and we would do the show together. And then he retired, and it became Choice Conversations, and I still will occasionally have some like repeat guests on where they're more or less a co-host as we talk about a particular topic or two, right? And then I will sometimes do solo shows, but most of my shows are like interview format, like this one where I'm having somebody on and having a conversation. And yeah, I found there's pros and cons to them. So it's like the the things I like about the solo shows is they can really be structured. I could put together like a nice outline ahead of time and come in, and it follows nicely, like the beginning, the middle, and the end. And, the content can be, really, really solid, but those are a lot of work, and they're me doing a lot of talking and the like, where, if I have a guest on, I could put the work on them and just say, Josh, why don't you run with this for a while? So I like that, and then there's also aspects of like having guests on as far as growing your audience goes. I have a guest on, and then they're like, oh, they share the link on, their website and social media, and like, hey, I was recently on Choice Conversations, check it out. So it kind of helps in that way as well. But the downside to having guests on is, like you said, there's not always chemistry, and sometimes you have somebody on and it's just, for whatever reason, there's not that chemistry, right? And, yes, that detracts from the show, from being as good as it could be, right? And then
exactly,
it can go in all kinds of crazy tangents too. So you get people like you're trying to steer the conversation in one direction and they keep going the other direction. So yeah, it's really interesting. And like you said, I don't know that there's really a right or a wrong answer. There's just different flavors of podcasts. There's pros and cons to all the different styles. And, I'm going to continue to mix and match as necessary to meet my needs. Right. So.
Yeah. And that works well. I can't say, that, but like if you're looking like if it's more of a business type podcast, you can use almost any format. Cause again, each one will just kind of give its own flavor, to it. But if you're doing, there's a lot of TV show podcasts, or they cover movies or entertainment type of things. I would say that generally those generally do better if you have a co-host or some type of roundtable. Because then you're able to bring additional people on. It's not just one person spouting off their own opinions of it, but because usually if someone's watching a TV show and they're a big fan of the TV show, they like talking about it with their friends. And so that's kind of how a lot of those podcasts are structured, and it works really well because it's what they're doing anyway. It's what the listeners are looking for because they want to have that conversation with multiple people, not just go to one person and get their perspective. So those generally do better, not as solo shows, but as a co-host situation, or if they have some kind of roundtable where there's multiple guests that come in and talk about it. And so I have a podcast like that based on the show 24. And when I started, I had me and a co-host. And so when I started that, I knew that I wasn't going to want to do that solo because I wanted to be able to have that back and forth, be able to have that additional perspective also. And so, because maybe there's something I missed and he caught, or vice versa. And so we're able to kind of bring some of those things. And then there's always the disagreements of, who's the favorite character and what was the favorite moment. And hey, I like this character. No, that character's crap and whatever. And then we ended up actually bringing in, periodically some guest people. And so there was two other guys that we would bring in that were kind of semi-regular, hosts, and they would come on once a month or something like that. And they would, help co-host with us. And then here just recently, we've had more of a roundtable format where we've had 3 or 4 of us on at a time, going back and forth, through the episodes. And that format definitely does a lot better with the TV show and entertainment style podcasts.
So tell me about a time when you had a co-host or like a round table and it just went horribly wrong. And give me an example of that and like what went wrong. That would be great.
Well, we did have one recently that I don't know. I don't know if I can say it was horribly wrong, but
you can say it. You're allowed.
But anyway, it didn't go quite as planned. And part of it was the episode that we were covering was kind of subpar. And so there was
that sucks. Yeah.
Yeah, I hate to say that. I mean, we love the show. I mean, obviously, we would do a podcast if we didn't love the show. But the season overall that we're covering right now has been a little less than what we had hoped for and what we expected from previous. But anyway, this particular episode was a little slower in development of the plot and the characters and things like that. So it's like halfway through, we're like, I think we kind of covered everything, but we just still kept talking, and so one person would say something. We went off on several tangents throughout, and just kind of bounced back and forth between some of the topics again. And so it definitely could have been cleaned up and could have been streamlined a lot more. We should have just said, okay, we got half an episode and that's good enough. That's all we need for this one. But we didn't. And so, I mean, you got multiple people like that. It's easier to keep going when you think you should stop anyway. But because you got one person that adds this comment and then this person adds a comment, and this person adds a comment. And so it's hard to be able to kind of round everybody up sometimes. Yeah. Unless you want to be the mean guy and just say, okay, here, let's just stop. All right, kids. But anyway, but I mean, we had fun. We had a good time as we went through it, and hopefully the audience was kind of with us on that. But anyway, so that was something I don't know, it was a month ago or something like that. But
right. Yeah, there's been plenty of times when I'm interviewing somebody and I record these over Skype, right? And I'll be sending them like chats like, we should probably start wrapping up. Hey, you might want to close up this thought soon, as they just like keep going and going and going, you know, and so I've been there before, but yeah, it's humorous.
Mm-hmm.
Now, podcasts, especially today, you know, as they've developed more, they become more mainstream, and there's a lot more people listening to podcasts. You're now seeing where it seems like almost every podcast has some kind of an angle to it where it's used for marketing something or other.
Mm-hmm.
You know, where it's almost like it seems like the majority of podcasts now, they're created at the creation time. People are looking at, okay, how can I use this product to how can I use this podcast rather to advance my business, to sell my products or services or whatever? And it's almost like the genesis of the podcast is a business. You have the business idea first, and then you're like, okay, well, one way that I can use to build a relationship with my customers, and, you know, as we build that relationship, they're going to buy more and more stuff from me, is to have a podcast, you know, because it's a really personal thing to have someone's attention like that on a recurring basis. So I guess, what has your experience been in that area? Are you seeing a lot with your clients? What can you tell me about that?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's definitely a big trend with that. And it's hard to say if percentage wise, if there's more that are using it as a marketing arm, as opposed to like hobby type. But there's definitely an increasing number of them that are coming out, because I mean, there's still plenty of them that are just hobby podcasts, and so that they come out and people just podcast because it's a hobby for them.
Expression.
But yeah, definitely. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say it's about expression. They get an opportunity to express themselves.
Right, exactly. And so people people like to talk. I mean, social media came out, and it was an avenue for people to just be able to get out there and share their thoughts with the world. And then with podcasting, it's another avenue for people to be able to, instead of write stuff, they can talk. And a lot of people prefer to talk as opposed to write. And so it makes it easy for people to be able to do that. And now we got live streaming and things like that, where people, they got their phones out there live streaming as they're walking through an audience of something or whatever, through a crowd, and they're giving. So it's an opportunity for people to be able to do that. So with podcasting, though, it's a great opportunity for as you said, for a business to be able to cultivate a relationship with their audience and with their potential customers. And I've seen it go several different ways. And I've seen both of them flop, and I've seen both of them be able to succeed. And so there's some that their podcast is very overtly an ad for their services, and so that can work in some cases. And there's some very popular podcasts that that's the case, that it's very obvious that they are telling you that, okay, the stuff that we're sharing on this podcast, we sell this. We have a service that dives in deeper, and they let you know that there's no question after you're done listening that's the case. And that can work for some people. Usually it doesn't work as well if you're just starting. But if you already have an audience, if you already have people that are following you, and one of the things is, you don't want that to be just the overall focus, as in, because who wants to tune into an infomercial on purpose? And so usually, if you're on TV and you're watching an infomercial, it's usually because there's nothing else good on, and it's like, okay, well, that looks kind of interesting, and maybe, and then after you watch that infomercial, 10 times over a month, you're like, okay, well, maybe I'll go ahead and buy that, because I could use whatever, that set of knives, or whatever, that pasta maker, or whatever it is, Sure. And so, but again, it's that stuff that happens over time. And so that's the best way to be able to approach it if you're looking at it from a business perspective, as far as trying to do marketing, is you got to look at the long game. I heard different stats, but basically someone needs to hear something 4 to 7 to 10 times before they actually take action on something. And so if you do it as an extension of your podcast, or as an extension of your business, you want to make sure that you're approaching it from the listener's perspective first, as far as trying to solve a need that they have and actually give them something that they can do something with, and not just tiny little teasers and, okay, now you need to pay me $10,000 to be able to learn what step number 2 is, or whatever. But anyway, or they give you step number 2, but then you're like, wait a minute, how do I get on the boat when it's already 50 feet offshore? And so how do I get onto the boat? Give me that information. But anyway, you wanted to serve the people first, and then say, hey, I can work with you one-on-one. I can deliver all of this stuff in a much better format. And so you want to serve them first, and that needs to be the priority thing. And then you're developing that relationship, and as you go on, it'll start slow, but then after a while, it'll start to pick up business, because people are starting to know you. They're starting to trust you. As that saying is, the people do business with people that they know, like, and trust. And so as you develop the relationship, you're building that trust to where they say, okay, yeah, this guy, he knows what he's talking about in this area, and I'm willing to go ahead now that I've been following him for a while, and I know he has great stuff. I trust him, even though I've never met him in person. All I do is I hear his voice every week telling me all this information, and I can trust him to be able to go forward. And so if you're approaching this as a business, it's kind of the thing that you want to do, is you want to focus on providing value and be able to give a lot of value up front, and realize that you're going to give a lot of value and not see return on that for a little while. But then after a while of you giving value, people are going to say, hey, I need to give back to this guy because he's helped me already do this, and I haven't even paid for anything yet. I feel like I owe him. And so there's that law of reciprocity that kicks in as well. And so so that's kind of my perspective on that. And so, but I've seen it flop, because people get too overt, and it kind of turns people away, because it's like, okay, I know I want this information, but I don't want to just hear him talk about himself and his business. I want to get some meat to this stuff here. And so, I don't want to just look at the pictures. I want to get a little bit of sample to be able to let me know that, okay, this guy really does know his stuff, not just that he talks about knowing his stuff.
Yeah, I think, like you said, giving value is the key. Everything I've heard as I study into this is the people that are the most successful, they're the ones that are just giving the most value out. The more you do that, the more people are going to be willing to to give back to you and to buy other products and the like. So yeah, I think that's the name of the game. And, there's a number of podcasts that I listen to that are essentially infomercials, but I keep listening to them because they give me so much value, even without buying the products. It's still great value what they're giving me. So, yeah, that's a good format for that. And it's one of those things where I'm trying to evaluate like what I want to do going forward. Because there are ways to make money off of podcasts where it's not like an infomercial. You could even just be doing a hobby, TV reviewing 24 or whatever, and just have ads. And if you've got a big enough audience, that can start to make some decent money if your audience is large enough. But then there are other ways where, you can build a business off of it, kind of thing, where, like your podcast itself is basically an advertisement for the products or services you're selling. So, and as I move forward, I'm like, I love choice conversations, and I love the people I get to meet and the great conversations I get to have. And, is there a way to continue that and keep giving value to my audience while also transitioning into something that rewards me for my time? So, I've been exploring that and just really in the last, year, 6 months or whatever, looking at different options for that. But it's really intriguing and pretty neat times we live in that this is available. What were the options like when I was a kid? I'm 42 years old, and it's like before, what was your options for doing this? It was like starting a pirate radio station. I mean, what could you do if you if you could try to get into the industry, break into the industry for getting a radio show or something, or a TV show? But I mean, your odds of that were so small that or now anybody can do it with very little money. So it's really great times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. All right. Well, what would you say would be like your closing thoughts? What were some of the like big things you would recommend to my audience if they were looking at becoming a media creator?
Okay. Yeah. And so, what I have to say would apply. It doesn't matter if it's a podcast or blogging or if you're doing video or anything like that, is, as I said, you want to keep your audience first. Because if you're not serving them, then they're not going to want to listen. They're not going to want to tune in. And so, I mean, obviously it's important what you want, what you like and things like that. And hopefully you're not doing something that you detest or whatever, or that you're just like, oh, okay, I can kind of tolerate this thing. But because, I mean, you need to have that desire to be able to keep it going. But you want to keep your audience first, though, because, I mean, as much as you like it, if nobody else likes it, it can still be good because you like to be able to talk about it, but it's not going to be able to reach anybody else. And so you need to keep them in mind first. And so you need to know who it is that you're talking to. And the more specific that you can get, the better, because if you're talking about something to just someone that you meet, just whatever, like you're at the store or something like that, and you happen to pick up a conversation or whatever, you'll have a different conversation with maybe a 50-year-old woman than you would if you met a guy that's 30. And so you might have totally different conversations. You might be talking about, I don't know, maybe it's stereotyping, but you might be talking about maybe home economic type stuff with the woman, but you might be talking about gaming stuff with the 30-year-old guy. Or something similar. I don't know. And so you need to know who it is that you're talking to, because if you're trying to talk to a 60-year-old woman and you're trying to talk about the latest and greatest game that's coming out, it may not work too well. And so if you're talking to trying to talk to millennials and you're talking about how great the NES was back in the 80s, they're going to say, what? I mean, what kind of system was that? And so, so anyway, so the more you know your audience, maybe that wasn't the best analogy, but the more you know your audience, the better you're going to be able to tailor your message to them, and it's going to make sense to them. And so I can understand that. I mean, with that gaming thing, I used to be a gamer when I was a kid, and so I used to be into all kinds of stuff like that. But I'm not so much anymore. But if I come across someone and say, "Hey, I remember playing such and such a game when I was a kid," oh yeah, I remember, and then we're able to have a good conversation, kind of reminiscing over those things from times past. But if someone would come up and they would start talking about the newest games, I played games, but I have no idea what you're talking about when you're talking about whatever the latest. I don't even know what the latest games are anymore. But but anyway, and so I mean, I want to be the target audience. I mean, if they were to say, "Hey, we're talking about video games," like, "Hey, I like video games," so I tune in and find out that, hey, they're talking about all this new stuff that's come out, and I have absolutely no clue what they're talking about. I'm not going to stick around. But maybe that's what they want. They want to target people that like what they like. But anyway, you need to know who your audience is so you can be able to really tailor that conversation to them and to be able to really focus in on that way. And then additionally, when you're doing that, if you do decide to monetize, the more you know a person and who it is that you're speaking to, you'll be able to recommend things that are actually helpful to them, which actually is key to them wanting to purchase from you, or go through you as an affiliate or whatever. And so again, because it's like you're speaking directly to their needs. And so, so there's a lot of different things. I mean, for someone that a lot of business podcasts, I mean, they have a lot of the same advertisements on the podcast, and so there's FreshBooks. And so, I mean, if someone's listening to a business podcast, there's a good chance that they're going to need something as far as finances, and FreshBooks is a great fit for being able to fit into that need. And so it may not deal directly with the podcast itself. And so there's one I listen to. It's called Read to Lead, and it's about reading and the things that you can be able to glean from reading, basically mostly business type books, and personal growth books. And it's not specifically about finances, but one of his major sponsors is FreshBooks. And so it's a fitting thing though, because he knows his audience is filled with people that are entrepreneurs and business people that might need financial services like that. And so the more you know your audience, you can be able to deliver things that really cater to the needs that they have.
Right. Nope, I like it. Sounds good. So if my audience would like to get in touch with you or check out some of your work, what's the best places to go for that? Okay,
well, I probably should only give one, but I mean, we talked about Creative Studio podcast. That's found at creativestudio.academy. And so if you want to check out that podcast and different things there that I'm publishing, you can look at that. But my business, and you can check out that specifically at podcastguymedia.com.
Cool. All right. Well, it's been fun, Josh. Thanks for coming on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
All right. I hope you enjoyed that. Podcasting is something I'm passionate about, so it was fun for me to have on somebody who their business is podcasting, not just making podcasts, but making podcasts about podcasts with helping other people to make podcasts and the like. So a lot of really valuable stuff there. And podcasting, or just media creation, it's just such a powerful tool in today's world for many things, be it self-expression or starting your own business, or marketing the business you already have going. So good stuff. All right, if you would like to help the show out, the best way to do that is to go to patreon.com/choiceconversations and become a contributor. There's a link to that in the show notes. I would really appreciate that. And like I mentioned at the start of the show, I would love to hear some feedback from you in the Choice Conversations Facebook group. So come on over and join the group and say hi. All right, take care of yourselves. Have a great day. Or not. The choice is yours.